It began with a letter that no one expected to resurface, a letter that promised to reveal truths too dangerous for the public eye, truths that would shake a family already living in the spotlight of Hollywood fame. Imagine receiving a note from your parent, someone you trusted implicitly, someone whose words shaped the course of your life. And instead of comfort, the letter delivers fear, warning, and suspicion. For Romy Reiner, that moment was not a hypothetical. It became a horrifying reality, and it would ultimately leave scars that no therapy, no time, and no apology could ever erase. The Reiner family, a name synonymous with Hollywood brilliance. Rob Reiner, the celebrated director and actor, known for classics like When Harry Met Sally and A Few Good Men. Tracy Reiner, his daughter, a respected figure in the entertainment world. Michelle and Rob, a couple whose public image was the very picture of success and stability. And then there was Nick, the youngest son, whose life would suddenly become the center of an unimaginable tragedy. A family that seemed flawless from the outside, perfect in the eyes of fans and the media, but like so many families, the truth behind closed doors was far more complicated. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The story we are about to explore begins with one of the most shocking moments any family could endure, the discovery of two brutally murdered parents in their own home. Rob Reiner, 78, and Michelle, 70, found stabbed to death in their $13.5 million Brentwood estate. The scene was horrific, something lifted straight from the darkest corners of a crime thriller. But this was no movie. This was reality. Their bodies were discovered by Romy Reiner, their youngest daughter, 27, who walked into a nightmare that would change her life forever. And within that nightmare was a note, a lost letter, that hinted at secrets no one had anticipated, secrets that were about to ignite one of the most scandalous family sagas in recent Hollywood history. Romy, the one who should have been comforted by the presence of family, was instead left with the burden of discovery. Reports suggest she told police about a dangerous family member who should be a suspect. The implications were immediate, shocking, and unsettling. In that moment, the idyllic image of the Reiner family shattered. The home that once represented wealth, fame, and security was now the scene of betrayal, fear, and suspicion. But who could have imagined that the roots of this horror might stretch back years, hidden in a simple, unassuming letter, tucked away, forgotten, or deliberately hidden? That letter was Rob Reiner's lost message to his youngest daughter. Its contents are being described in whispers and leaks, each more chilling than the last. The note, according to sources, was not just a personal communication. It was a warning, a confession, and a guidepost for Romy in navigating a family fraught with hidden danger. It spoke of secrets that were carefully guarded, of warnings that were ignored, and of tensions that were slowly, insidiously building beneath the surface. And now, in the aftermath of a murder investigation that has captured the attention of the world, the letter has become central to understanding what went wrong and why. Nick Reiner, the 32-year-old son who lived in the guest house on the estate, was arrested the night of the murders. He faces 2 counts of first-degree murder. A shock to the public, yes, but to those who knew the family, it raised difficult, almost impossible questions. How could a son turn on his parents so violently? Was there a trigger, a breaking point that no one noticed? And crucially, how does this all connect to the letter that Rob Reiner wrote years ago but never sent, or that perhaps was meant to be seen only when the time was right? And then there's Tracy Reiner. Her arrest adds another layer of complexity and intrigue to this story. What role did she play, if any, in the sequence of events leading to the murder? Was she complicit, or was she an innocent party caught in the wake of a family catastrophe? The whispers, the reports, and the hints that have emerged so far paint a picture that is murky, disturbing, and sensational, all at once. But the questions don't stop there. How did Romy, the youngest daughter, interpret the letter? Did it influence her perceptions of her siblings, her parents, and the family dynamics she had grown up with? Did it warn her of the danger, or was it a message that was too subtle, too cryptic to prevent the tragedy that ultimately unfolded? And what about the other family members? Friends, colleagues, and insiders are all speaking in fragments, cautious not to reveal too much. but their words suggest a complex web of jealousy, betrayal, and long-simmering tensions that culminated in a night of horror. The letter's existence raises difficult moral and emotional questions as well. What do you do when a loved one warns you of potential danger within your own family? How do you weigh trust against caution, love against fear? Romy's position was impossible, walking into a scene no one could be prepared for, carrying a note that may have predicted or at least hinted at the horrors she was about to witness. And yet, in the months following the murders, investigators, legal experts, and journalists alike have been circling back to that letter, trying to piece together not only its contents, but its significance in the broader narrative of this tragedy. And the timing of the story is itself haunting. Why now? Why did the letter resurface in a moment that coincides with these tragic deaths? Some speculate it was accidental, others believe it was intentional. Perhaps it was meant to protect, to guide, or even to warn. Or maybe it was meant to expose truths that the family could no longer hide. Regardless, its impact is undeniable. It has altered public perception, it has shifted legal narratives, and it has forced the Reiner family and the world to confront the darkest corners of what was thought to be a picture-perfect life. As we dive deeper into this story, we will uncover layers that are as shocking as they are tragic. We will explore the dynamics of the Reiner family, the contents of the letter, and the shocking sequence of events that led to arrests, accusations, and heartbreak. You will hear about the discovery of the bodies, the arrest of Nick Reiner, and the questions surrounding Tracy Reiner. You will see the interplay of fame, family secrets, and the dark reality that sometimes lurks behind the Hollywood lights. And throughout, you will be forced to ask yourself, what would I do if I found myself in Romy Reiner's position? If a loved one's warning came too late, how would I process the aftermath? The story is far from over. The letter is far from fully revealed. And the implications, legal, emotional, and moral, are still unfolding. Some questions may never be answered. Some truths may remain forever hidden in the shadows of wealth, fame, and family loyalty. But one thing is certain. What started as a simple, lost message has now become the linchpin in one of the most shocking Hollywood tragedies in recent memory. And yet, as devastating as these events are, they are only the beginning. Because what Romy Reiner discovered that day, and what she has carried with her since, was more than the loss of her parents. It was a revelation of truths, betrayals, and dangers that no one could have anticipated. And as we begin to peel back the layers of this story, one thing becomes clear. The Reiner family tragedy is not just a story of loss. It is a story of secrets, warnings, and a letter that, once exposed, would change everything. They were Hollywood royalty, though no one called them that outright. To the public, Rob Reiner was simply Rob Reiner. The acclaimed director, the actor who had captured hearts with humor and heartbreak alike, the man behind some of the most iconic films in cinematic history. But to those who knew him intimately, the man behind the cameras was far more complex, layered with contradictions that only a family could truly understand. And then there were his children, Tracy, Romy, and Nick, each navigating their own paths through the world of fame and fortune, but all deeply entwined in the gravity of the Reiner name. The dynasty was built on talent, reputation, and relentless ambition. Rob's career had spanned decades, each film a monument to creativity, yet behind the glitz, there were family dynamics that rarely made the headlines. Tracy Reiner, a steady figure in Hollywood, was a reminder of her father's meticulous attention to craft, a woman who had learned early to balance loyalty and independence. Romy, the youngest, was a quiet observer, often watching the family unfold like a scripted drama, unaware that real life could be far more brutal. Nick, the youngest son, was charming yet enigmatic, a man whose relationship with his family would later come under terrifying scrutiny. Hollywood had always been fascinated with families like the Reiners, not just for their success, but for the tension simmering beneath the polished surfaces. Rob and Michelle, outwardly a model couple, had maintained a delicate equilibrium for years. Their $13.5 million Brentwood estate was a symbol of achievement, a castle of comfort and prestige. Yet within its walls, the family struggled with issues that money and fame could never resolve, issues that would ultimately culminate in tragedy. Consider this: a family whose name was synonymous with celebration and laughter, suddenly facing horror in the very home that had once been a sanctuary. It is difficult to imagine the dissonance. The public persona of the Reiners as pillars of Hollywood charm versus the private reality of fear, suspicion, and hidden anger. And yet, these contradictions are the foundation of every great family saga. They are also the starting point for understanding how tragedy could unfold in a home that seemed untouchable. To understand the events that would later shock the world, we must look back at the family's history, their relationships, and the unspoken rules that governed their lives. Rob Reiner's influence on his children was profound. His work ethic, creative genius, and occasional intensity shaped their upbringing. Tracy absorbed these lessons in a measured way, learning resilience and discretion. Romy, always the youngest, experienced a version of love that was both protective and, at times, heavy-handed. Nick's path was more turbulent, his personality a mix of charm and volatility, traits that would later raise uncomfortable questions in the wake of his parents' murder. The Reiners' Hollywood connections added another layer of pressure. Friends, colleagues, and acquaintances formed a network that often blurred the line between personal and professional life. Celebrations were public, but arguments were private, hidden behind doors, whispered in corridors, or recorded only in the memories of those present. And within these interactions, seeds of tension quietly took root, unnoticed by those outside the family bubble. It is in these tensions that we begin to see the first hints of the story's darker undercurrent. While the world admired the Reiners' successes, inside the Brentwood estate, dynamics of control, jealousy, and unspoken resentment existed. Every family has them, of course, but in this case, the stakes were magnified by fame, money, and the legacy of one man's career. Rob's influence was undeniable, and yet, influence alone could not prevent conflicts from escalating. Tracy, as the middle child, often found herself mediating between the extremes of Romy's quiet perception and Nick's restless energy. She understood the unspoken rules, what could be said, what must be hidden, and who could be trusted. Romy, meanwhile, absorbed lessons from observation, developing intuition about people and situations that would later prove critical. Nick's path was more unpredictable, a combination of privilege, rebellion, and impulsivity, creating the kind of tension that families often struggle to contain. But the most crucial element, the thread that would later connect to the lost letter, was Rob's awareness of potential dangers. He was not blind to the volatility of his family dynamics. In his professional life, he could control narratives, scripts, and characters. In his personal life, however, he was navigating uncharted territory. The lost letter, as we will later explore, was an attempt to communicate a warning, a plea, and a reflection all in one. It was Rob Reiner's attempt to manage the unmanageable, to prepare his youngest daughter, Romy, for eventualities she could never have predicted. The estate itself, luxurious and sprawling, served as both a symbol of achievement and a pressure cooker of unresolved family issues. Each room, each hallway, had witnessed the ordinary rhythms of life. Dinners, celebrations, quiet conversations, but also the undercurrents of tension. Money, fame, and legacy were invisible forces shaping decisions, behaviors, and, ultimately, the tragic outcome. As we consider the Reiner dynasty, it becomes clear that the family story is not just about success. It is about the human complexity behind the facade. It is about ambition and expectation, love and betrayal, observation and miscommunication. And it is about how a single family, in the blink of an eye, can go from a symbol of Hollywood stability to the epicenter of a shocking tragedy that no one saw coming. Yet even with all of this context, questions remain. How did a family so connected, so accomplished, allow secrets to fester to the point of disaster? How could a letter, written in a moment of foresight or fear, become a key to unraveling a murder that would shake Hollywood to its core? These are questions that will guide us as we move through the story, chapter by chapter, uncovering layers of tension, revelation, and horror that no one expected, and that no one will soon forget. The Reiner family dynasty, as impressive and glamorous as it seemed, was built on fragile foundations. And in the aftermath of murder, arrests, and revealed secrets, it is precisely those fragile foundations that crack under the weight of truth. A letter can seem innocuous, almost harmless, a slip of paper, a collection of words arranged with care, sometimes forgotten in a drawer or tucked away in a box. But in the case of the Reiner family, this letter carried a weight far beyond ink and paper. It wasn't just correspondence. It was a warning, a confession, and, as the events would later show, a premonition. The moment it emerged, it would transform the narrative of the Reiner tragedy from shocking to unfathomable. No one expected the letter to surface. Rumors had floated for years about Rob Reiner's tendency to leave written notes to his children, sometimes advice, sometimes observations, sometimes cryptic warnings. But this one was different. It was addressed to Romy, the youngest daughter, in a way that suggested urgency and gravity. The words on that page weren't casual reminders or expressions of parental love. They were a map of concern, a guide meant to navigate situations that Romy could never have anticipated, including threats that came from inside the family itself. The story of how the letter was discovered is almost cinematic in itself. Reports indicate it was found among personal papers in Rob Reiner's estate, hidden in a place where only a family member could stumble across it. The timing was chilling. The letter came to light shortly after the murder of Rob and Michelle, at a moment when the family and the world were reeling from the sheer brutality of the crime. Some speculate that the letter had been intended to remain private until Romy was older or until certain family tensions reached a point that Rob foresaw but couldn't prevent. Others wonder if it had been purposely concealed, as though Rob knew that revealing it too early could stir the very dangers he was trying to avoid. The letter's contents, although never fully released to the public, have been described in fragments that suggest a mixture of love, caution, and forewarning. Phrases like, "Trust your instincts," "Some truths are more dangerous than lies," and "Not all threats are visible," hint at a father acutely aware of instability and potential peril within his own household. Imagine reading those words while still processing the ordinary pressures of family life, school, work, friendships, and then realizing they were instructions for survival in a situation far darker than anything Romy could have imagined. Psychologists and family experts have pointed out that letters like this are often overlooked, misunderstood, or dismissed, especially by younger recipients. But in Romy's case, it wasn't just a note of advice. It was a lifeline, a set of coded instructions for interpreting behavior, for recognizing danger, and perhaps for navigating betrayal that might come from the people she trusted most. It's a chilling thought. A parent attempting to protect a child not from strangers, not from external threats, but from their own family. A reminder that sometimes the people closest to us can harbor secrets that are as dangerous as any outsider. The timing of the letter's emergence is part of what makes it so compelling and terrifying. It surfaced in a moment when investigators were already looking into Nick Reiner's actions, when Tracy Reiner was facing scrutiny, and when Romy herself was trying to process the trauma of discovering her parents' bodies. The letter became more than a document. It became evidence, testimony, and context. It offered glimpses into a family dynamic that, until that point, had been shrouded in public admiration and private mystery. From a storytelling perspective, the letter functions as a pivot point. It shifts the narrative from a straightforward crime to a complex psychological thriller, where words written years earlier could influence events with deadly consequences. It forces us to reconsider the relationships within the Reiner family. Could the warning in the letter have prevented the tragedy? Or did it merely highlight a danger that was impossible to avoid, no matter how much foresight or caution Romy exercised? Insiders suggest that the letter also hints at tension between the siblings, subtle warnings about behavior, disagreements, and perhaps even underlying resentment. Romy, as the youngest, may have been seen as more vulnerable, more likely to be manipulated or hurt by family members who had their own agendas. The letter's tone, as reconstructed from leaked passages, suggests Rob's acute awareness of these dynamics. He wrote not just as a father, but as someone deeply familiar with the psychology of those around him, someone who understood that intentions can be concealed behind polite smiles, that danger can hide behind familiar faces. And yet, there is a haunting irony here. The very act of writing the letter, meant to protect, may have had unforeseen consequences. Some speculate that if certain family members had known about its existence, it could have intensified suspicion, paranoia, or rivalry. The Reiner household, already a pressure cooker of wealth, fame, and expectation, may have been destabilized further by the knowledge that one member was being forewarned while others were left in the dark. The public, of course, can only speculate about the letter's full contents. But what emerges clearly from the fragments that have been reported is that the message was not just personal, it was prescient. It identified danger, hinted at possible outcomes, and offered guidance that Romy would need in ways she could never anticipate. Imagine the pressure Romy must have felt. In one hand, a document from a father whose judgment she trusted implicitly. In the other, the horrifying reality of losing both parents to a violent act within her own family circle. The letter's advice, warnings, and insights were no longer theoretical. They were urgent, immediate, and life-altering. Every word took on weight. Every suggestion became a tool for understanding the incomprehensible. And in that moment, Romy was no longer just the youngest daughter. She was a witness, a key holder, and someone navigating a labyrinth of secrets and danger that had been laid out for her years in advance. The letter's impact also extended beyond Romy. It has become a focal point for investigators piecing together motive, opportunity, and psychological states within the family. Legal experts note that such communications can influence interpretations of behavior, suggest premeditation, or provide insight into relationships that might otherwise remain hidden. In this case, the letter is as much a piece of the puzzle as physical evidence. It offers a lens through which to view interactions, past grievances, and the potential triggers that may have led to the violent events in Brentwood. And while the letter is central to the story, it also raises larger questions about family, trust, and foresight. What do we do when someone we love warns us of dangers we cannot yet see? How do we reconcile love with fear, trust with caution, and the instinct to protect with the inevitability of human error? For Romy, these questions are no longer abstract. They are immediate, visceral, and impossible to ignore. As we prepare to delve further into the tragedy, it is important to remember that this letter is not just a relic, it is a lens. It reframes everything that followed. It gives context to the shocking discovery of Rob and Michelle's bodies, to the arrest of Nick Reiner, and to the scrutiny surrounding Tracy Reiner. It hints at family dynamics that are far more dangerous than anyone outside the household could imagine. And most importantly, it forces us to confront the idea that sometimes warnings come too late, or in forms that are too subtle for us to act upon until it's already too late. But what came next, the discovery of the bodies and the immediate chaos that engulfed the family, would test the warnings of that letter in ways that no one could have predicted. And the consequences of its existence, both foreseen and unforeseen, would ripple through the Reiner family, the media, and the world at large, revealing truths that were as horrifying as they were unavoidable. The lost letter had emerged. Its presence would not just inform the investigation, it would redefine it. And yet, the full story, how Romy interpreted it, how it connected to her siblings, and how it may have influenced events leading to murder, was only just beginning to unfold. It was a morning that Romy Reiner would never forget. A day that began like any other quickly became the scene of a horror story no one could have imagined. She walked through the familiar halls of the Brentwood estate, a home she had grown up in, a space that had once been the backdrop of birthdays, celebrations, and quiet family evenings. But that morning, the air was heavy, oppressive, and tinged with a sense of something unspoken, something waiting to be discovered. Romy had no idea that the world she thought she knew was about to shatter. In the quiet, serene moments before the discovery, there was a sense of normalcy. The sun was just beginning to illuminate the sprawling estate, filtering through the large windows and glinting off polished floors. Yet beneath that calm, the home was hiding a nightmare. Every corner of the house, every room, was about to reveal a truth that would irrevocably change Romy's life. When she entered the main area of the estate, she encountered the unimaginable. Her parents, Rob and Michelle Reiner, had been murdered. The brutality of the scene was shocking even to someone prepared for the worst. Reports indicate that both had been stabbed multiple times, their lives violently taken in what appeared to be a calculated attack. For Romy, the emotional impact was immediate, visceral. Shock, disbelief, and grief collided all at once, creating a paralysis that left her struggling to comprehend the reality of what had just occurred. But beyond the horror of witnessing her parents' bodies, there was another, more complex layer to Romy's experience. She remembered the lost letter, the warnings carefully penned by her father, words that had seemed abstract or precautionary before. Now, in the aftermath of the discovery, the letter's meaning was painfully clear. It was not just advice, it was a prescient warning, a document that hinted at danger and foreseen betrayal. Romy was now living the reality her father had tried to prepare her for, and the weight of that knowledge added another layer to her shock. In the chaos that followed, Romy's role shifted dramatically. She went from being a daughter discovering tragedy to a key witness in a crime that had the potential to destroy the remaining family structure. According to sources, she immediately informed authorities about her suspicions regarding a dangerous family member. That statement would become a cornerstone of the investigation, setting the stage for the arrest of her brother, Nick Reiner. But the question remains, what did she see, what did she know, and how did the letter influence her perception of the events unfolding before her? The intersection of the letter and the discovery is crucial to understanding the psychological complexity of this moment. Imagine the mental and emotional strain of realizing that the very dangers your parent warned you about have materialized. The letter may have suggested vigilance, caution, and awareness, but it could not prepare Romy for the raw, unfiltered reality of her parents' murder. And yet, that letter may have also given her a framework for understanding what she witnessed. A way to make sense of chaos in a world suddenly defined by fear and grief. The response from authorities was swift. Police arrived at the estate shortly after the discovery, guided in part by Romy's account of the scene and her suspicions regarding family dynamics. Statements made to law enforcement indicated that Romy had pointed out specific behaviors or patterns that she believed were connected to the crime. Her insights, influenced by the letter and her own observations of her family, became central to the investigation, framing both the immediate response and the longer-term inquiry into motive and opportunity. Psychologists analyzing the case note that the discovery of a parent's body, particularly under violent circumstances, is among the most traumatic experiences a person can endure. For Romy, this trauma was compounded by the added layers of family complexity, the prior knowledge hinted at in her father's letter, and the looming presence of a sibling, Nick, who would soon be implicated in the crime. The emotional landscape was fraught with grief, fear, and confusion, creating a psychological pressure cooker that no child should ever face. Adding to the tension was the question of motive. Why would Nick, or any family member, commit such a violent act? How could a family that appeared so cohesive publicly harbor tensions deep enough to erupt in murder? Romy's observations, informed by years of growing up within this dynamic, became critical in helping investigators piece together a timeline, identify potential triggers, and understand the fractured relationships at play. Every detail she provided, whether about past disputes, sibling rivalries, or subtle signs of resentment, was scrutinized, analyzed, and cross-referenced with evidence. The media, naturally, seized on Romy's role. Headlines painted her as both witness and insider, someone uniquely positioned to understand the family dynamics that had contributed to the tragedy. Public interest was immediate and intense. Social media buzzed with speculation, theories, and opinions about what Romy knew, how she interpreted the letter, and the role she played in alerting authorities. This public scrutiny added yet another layer of pressure on Romy, who was navigating not only personal grief but the relentless gaze of the world. And then there was the emotional weight of suspicion. Romy's statement about a dangerous family member did not just guide investigators. It altered perceptions within the family itself. Allegiances, trust, and assumptions were suddenly questioned. The discovery of her parents' bodies was no longer just a personal tragedy. It became a prism through which every relationship, every previous disagreement, and every family tension was re-examined. In a matter of hours, the Reiner family dynamic shifted from ordinary to extraordinary, from private to publicly scrutinized, from familiar to dangerously unknown. The combination of the letter, the discovery of the bodies, and Romy's immediate observations created a narrative that was complex, layered, and emotionally charged. It forced everyone involved, the family, investigators, and the public, to confront difficult questions about trust, perception, and the potential for danger within even the closest familial relationships. And it set the stage for the arrest of Nick Reiner, a turning point that would escalate the tragedy into a full-blown media and legal spectacle. For Romy, the experience was nothing short of transformative. In the span of a few hours, she went from being a daughter in a seemingly normal household to a critical witness in a case that had already captured international attention. The letter her father had written years earlier suddenly became more than words. It became a tool for interpretation, a lens through which to view chaos, and perhaps even a blueprint for survival in a situation no child should ever have to navigate. Yet questions remained. What had Rob truly intended with the letter? Could its guidance have altered the outcome if circumstances had been different? How much of the tragedy was preventable, and how much was inevitable once family tensions reached a breaking point? These are questions that investigators, psychologists, and journalists continue to grapple with, and that Romy herself would have to confront in the months and years to come. And as the investigation progressed, as arrests were made, and as the media frenzy intensified, the significance of Romy's discovery became increasingly apparent. She was not just the youngest daughter. She was the key witness, the person who bridged the gap between private family life and public tragedy, and the one who held the first clues to understanding the nightmare that had unfolded in the Brentwood estate. The night the news broke, the world froze. Nick Reiner, the youngest son of Rob and Michelle Reiner, had been arrested at the very estate where his parents had been brutally murdered. 32 years old, living in the guest house on the Brentwood property, he was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, a designation that immediately conveyed the severity and premeditation authorities believed was involved. For the Reiner family, the arrest was more than a legal action. It was a seismic rupture that threatened to destroy the already fragile remnants of familial trust. Imagine the scene: flashing police lights reflecting off the manicured grounds, officers moving swiftly through the estate, and neighbors peering from behind curtains, unable to comprehend how a family so outwardly perfect could be at the center of such horror. The arrest was swift, almost surgical. Nick was taken into custody without incident, yet the impact was immediate. For Romy, the shock was compounded. Her observations and suspicions had pointed toward a dangerous family member, and now, those suspicions were crystallized into an official action, a legal affirmation of what many had feared. The media response was instantaneous. Headlines screamed across the internet: Nick Reiner arrested for parents' murder, and Hollywood shocked by Reiner family tragedy. Social media erupted with speculation, with followers dissecting every known fact about Nick, his personality, and his relationships with his parents and siblings. Pundits and journalists began to dig into old interviews, social media posts, and past family anecdotes, searching for clues that might explain the unthinkable. Every detail, no matter how minor, was scrutinized in the harsh spotlight of public curiosity. Authorities released limited information, but enough to paint a picture of gravity. According to police statements, evidence suggested a high degree of premeditation. The nature of the stabbings, the presence of the victims' bodies in areas of the home that were typically private, and other forensic details indicated that this was not a spontaneous act. Investigators emphasized that the case was ongoing, but the arrest alone sent shockwaves through Hollywood and beyond. Nick's role transformed overnight from that of a son in a family tragedy to a central figure in a criminal investigation of unprecedented magnitude. For those close to the family, the arrest raised uncomfortable questions. How could a son commit such a violent act against parents who had provided him with everything? Was it the result of long-simmering tensions, impulsive rage, or something more calculated? And, crucially, how did the lost letter factor into all of this? Romy's revelation to police about a dangerous family member immediately linked the letter's warnings to the real-world unfolding of events. Was the letter meant to protect Romy from someone like Nick? Or had it merely foreshadowed a tragedy that no one could prevent? Nick's background was carefully examined by both investigators and the media. Known to be charming and sometimes unpredictable, he had lived a life that seemed, on the surface, unremarkable. He had no public record of criminal behavior, and friends described him as personable and engaging. Yet the arrest forced a reinterpretation of those characteristics. Charm became manipulation. Unpredictability became volatility. The narrative shifted from admiration to suspicion, and the world began to view Nick through the lens of horror, trying desperately to reconcile the image of a son with the reality of a suspected murderer. Psychologists and criminologists weighed in, noting that intra-family violence, while rare, often involves a complex web of motive, perceived grievance, and psychological instability. They examined potential triggers, long-standing resentment, perceived favoritism, financial pressures, or mental health struggles that might explain how an adult child could commit parricide. In Nick's case, these assessments were speculative but influential, adding layers of understanding to a situation that seemed, at first glance, inexplicable. The legal ramifications were immediate and intense. First-degree murder charges imply intent, planning, and deliberation. The prosecutors faced the challenge of presenting evidence that would not only establish guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, but also contextualize the actions within the family dynamics. Defense teams, on the other hand, began preparing to question motives, mental state, and the potential influence of external factors, including the lost letter, media scrutiny, and familial pressure. Every angle became critical, and every statement Nick had made over the years was potentially subject to scrutiny. Public reaction was polarized. Some expressed disbelief that a son could harm his parents, while others speculated about deeper, hidden family conflicts. Online forums dissected possible motives, leaked details of the letter, and even subtle body language from past public appearances. The Reiner family, already in the glare of public attention, became a case study in both tragedy and fascination. Social media transformed from a platform of mourning to one of relentless analysis, leaving no detail untouched. For Romy, the arrest was complicated by a tangle of emotions. Relief that a suspect had been apprehended was mixed with grief, guilt, and fear. She had been the one to alert authorities to a dangerous family member, a step that now seemed both prescient and devastating. Could she have prevented the murders? Had she done enough by speaking up? These questions, deeply personal and impossible to answer definitively, would haunt her in the months and years to come. The arrest also complicated the family's public image. Tracy Reiner, Romy's sister, now faced intense scrutiny. Observers wondered about her awareness, her possible involvement, and her knowledge of family tensions. Media speculation surged, creating additional pressure on a family already dealing with unimaginable grief. Each revelation, each leak, each public statement seemed to compound the horror, magnifying the tragedy beyond what any family could endure. As the investigation progressed, authorities began connecting the dots. Evidence, statements, and the letter itself formed a network of understanding that framed Nick as the primary suspect. Yet the narrative was far from complete. Investigators cautioned that the presence of a suspect and the arrest were only the beginning. Establishing motive, opportunity, and intent required a meticulous, painstaking process. The complexity of family relationships, combined with the influence of fame and wealth, made this a case unlike any other. And so, the arrest of Nick Reiner marked a turning point, not only in the investigation but in the family's story. It transformed a horrific discovery into a legal saga, a media spectacle, and a psychological study. It forced everyone to confront the reality that familial bonds, no matter how strong in appearance, can fracture in ways that are both shocking and tragic. Tracy Reiner had long been known as a calm, measured presence in the Reiner family. A sister, a daughter, and a Hollywood professional whose life was relatively stable compared to the chaos of fame surrounding her father. But in the wake of the murders, Tracy found herself thrust into an unrelenting spotlight, her every action and word dissected by authorities, media, and the public alike. The arrest of her brother Nick had already shaken the family to its core, and now Tracy faced a scrutiny that threatened to upend her life completely. The first reports emerged within hours. Speculation that Tracy may have known more than she revealed, that she may have been aware of tensions, disputes, or even dangerous intentions within the family. Headlines across the country posed questions with no clear answers. What did Tracy know? And Tracy Reiner under investigation. In a matter of days, the quiet daughter of a Hollywood legend became a central figure in one of the most sensational family tragedies in recent memory. For Tracy, the situation was terrifying and bewildering. Imagine being a sister and a daughter, already reeling from the shocking deaths of your parents, suddenly facing insinuations that you might be implicated, or at least questioned, for your knowledge or lack thereof. The emotional stakes were immense. Each phone call, each interaction with law enforcement, each passing headline carried weight, demanding a level of composure that few could maintain under such extraordinary circumstances. Authorities reportedly focused on Tracy for several reasons. First, she was a direct witness to the family dynamics, privy to interactions between her siblings and parents. Investigators sought to understand whether she had observed signs of tension or aggression in Nick, whether she had been aware of threats, and whether she had any insight into conflicts that might have led to the murders. Psychologists studying the case noted the psychological burden Tracy faced. Being both a family member and a public figure in a high-profile investigation is an extraordinarily difficult position. She had to navigate grief, fear, and suspicion while maintaining a sense of self and protecting her own legal interests. The combination of personal trauma and public scrutiny created a pressure cooker environment where even minor missteps could be magnified into serious implications. The media's portrayal of Tracy added another layer of complexity. Reports ranged from sympathetic to accusatory, oscillating between highlighting her grief and questioning her potential complicity. Social media amplified every rumor, every reported statement, and every leaked detail, often distorting reality in ways that left little room for nuance. Public perception became a battleground, and Tracy, like her brother Nick, was caught at the center of a storm that seemed to have no end. Her professional life, though unrelated to the family tragedy, was also impacted. Interviews, public appearances, and work obligations became fraught with tension. Colleagues and associates, aware of the media frenzy, often approached cautiously, unsure how much to say or whether to engage at all. The ripple effect of the Reiner tragedy extended far beyond the Brentwood estate, touching every corner of Tracy's life. Complicating matters further was the question of motive and awareness. Could Tracy have foreseen the escalation of family tensions? Was she in a position to intervene, or was she simply another bystander in a family rife with hidden dangers? The lost letter loomed in the background, its warnings and insights casting a shadow over every action and decision. While Romy had been the direct recipient, Tracy's proximity to family communications made her awareness a key point for investigators seeking to understand the full scope of knowledge within the household. The psychological narrative here is crucial. Investigators and experts noted that siblings often play complex roles in family dynamics, balancing loyalty, rivalry, and sometimes fear. Tracy's position as the middle child, or as a sibling caught between the youngest and the more unpredictable, may have placed her in a difficult balancing act, observing behaviors while trying not to intervene or escalate conflicts. That dynamic, while common in families, becomes amplified in cases involving violence, high stakes, and deeply entrenched tensions. As the investigation continued, authorities examined Tracy's communications, past statements, and potential interactions with both her parents and her brother. Every detail became relevant. Text messages, emails, social media posts, and private conversations were scrutinized for signs of foreknowledge, complicity, or concern. While there was no evidence that Tracy had direct involvement in the murders, the fact that she was now under scrutiny illustrates the complexity of family crimes. Knowledge, awareness, and proximity can be as important as physical actions in understanding events. For the public, Tracy's scrutiny became a focal point of intrigue. Fans, followers, and media outlets debated her role endlessly. Some portrayed her as a victim, caught in circumstances beyond her control. Others speculated about hidden knowledge or involvement. This duality, sympathy and suspicion, added to the emotional intensity of the unfolding saga, keeping audiences captivated while the investigation itself remained ongoing and incomplete. Tracy's personal reflections, as glimpsed through rare interviews and statements, hint at the emotional complexity she endured. She described grief that was both immediate and layered, compounded by the shock of betrayal and suspicion. Losing parents is devastating under any circumstance, but when the context includes a family member's arrest and the looming presence of a cryptic, potentially foretelling letter, the experience becomes nearly impossible to process. Her journey, in essence, became one of navigating grief, suspicion, and the demands of public attention simultaneously. Adding yet another layer, legal experts suggest that being under scrutiny, even without formal charges, can have profound effects on both decision-making and emotional stability. Tracy's actions and statements were likely measured and cautious, yet every measured response could be interpreted in multiple ways by investigators, the media, and the public. This duality, a reality in which personal grief meets public speculation, creates a psychological environment fraught with tension and uncertainty. Tracy's scrutiny also underscores a larger theme. In high-profile family tragedies, the line between victim, witness, and suspect can blur. She was all three in different ways: grieving daughter, key witness to family dynamics, and person of interest for investigators seeking to understand the motives and relationships that led to murder. That ambiguity is central to the drama and complexity of the Reiner case, illustrating how tragedy can complicate perceptions and realities simultaneously. And yet, even under this intense pressure, Tracy maintained a presence, however private, that reflected both resilience and vulnerability. She was navigating uncharted territory, grief, public scrutiny, and family betrayal, all while trying to preserve some semblance of personal stability. Her experience highlights the human dimension of this tragedy. Beyond arrests, letters, and media coverage, there is a person grappling with unimaginable loss and the weight of suspicion. As the investigation unfolded, questions surrounding Tracy's awareness, role, and knowledge became increasingly central. How much did she understand about the tensions within the family? Was she aware of Nick's potential for violence? Did the letter reach her indirectly, altering her perceptions in ways unknown to investigators? These questions, complex and often unanswerable, demonstrate the intricate web of family dynamics that can turn tragedy into a narrative both compelling and horrifying. But what came next? The deeper investigation into motives, psychological profiling, and the unfolding legal battle would cast even more light on the Reiner family's hidden tensions. Tracy Reiner's scrutiny was just the beginning. The lost letter, the discovery of her parents' deaths, and the arrest of Nick had set in motion a chain of events whose consequences were still reverberating, and whose ultimate resolution remained elusive. The lost letter had become the silent witness in the Reiner family tragedy. Its existence was no longer a private relic, tucked away in a drawer or hidden among family documents. It had emerged as a critical piece of the puzzle, a document whose words could illuminate motives, reveal tensions, and provide insight into a household that, from the outside, had seemed flawless. But what made the letter so remarkable and terrifying was not just its timing, but the secrets it contained. According to sources, the letter was addressed to Romy Reiner, the youngest daughter, yet its implications extended far beyond her. Rob Reiner had written it with a mixture of love, caution, and foresight. In it, he reportedly acknowledged the volatility of certain family members, subtle warnings about behaviors that could escalate, and guidance on how to navigate situations where trust might be misplaced. These were not vague statements. They were carefully considered observations, almost prescient in their accuracy. Experts in family psychology note that letters like this are often reflections of parental intuition, capturing dynamics that may be invisible to casual observers. Rob's attention to detail, honed over decades of navigating high-pressure professional environments, translated into an acute awareness of the psychological currents within his own family. Every phrase in the letter, every warning, was designed to protect, to guide, and to prepare Romy for challenges that she might face, including those that could erupt within her immediate family. One fragment reportedly warned Romy to trust her instincts above appearances, a statement that now reads like a grim foreshadowing. In hindsight, it is chillingly clear that Rob sensed danger from within the very walls meant to safeguard the family. The letter did not merely offer advice on handling ordinary sibling conflicts. It spoke to the potential for violence, betrayal, and deception, indicating a depth of awareness that would later make investigators and family insiders question just how much Rob had understood about Nick's temperament and potential for aggression. Another part of the letter, sources say, hinted at hidden grievances and patterns that could turn destructive if unchecked. These words suggest that Rob had observed long-term tensions that might otherwise seem insignificant but could, under pressure, erupt into catastrophe. It is a reminder of how family dynamics often operate in cycles. Small disputes, perceived slights, or favoritism, left unaddressed, can grow into dangerous undercurrents. Rob's letter attempted to decode these patterns, to arm Romy with the understanding needed to navigate a potentially hostile environment. The letter also reportedly contained advice that was simultaneously practical and deeply emotional. How to protect oneself, how to recognize signs of manipulation, and how to maintain clarity in situations where loyalties might be tested. Psychologists reviewing the content emphasize that these kinds of communications are rare in families, not because parents fail to notice danger, but because articulating such insights can be emotionally fraught. For Rob, however, the letter was a way to communicate a truth he may have felt powerless to change directly. But the letter was not simply cautionary. It contained affirmations of love and connection, reinforcing that Romy was not alone in navigating these challenges. That mixture of guidance and care underscores a fundamental tension in the document. It was both a warning and a reassurance, an attempt to prepare a child for danger without destroying the bond that gave her strength. In many ways, the letter was Rob's final act of protection, a testament to his understanding of both human behavior and familial fragility. What makes the letter even more compelling is how it intersects with the events that followed. Investigators have suggested that some phrases could have been interpreted as direct warnings about Nick's behavior. If Romy had taken the advice to heart, or even partially, she may have been able to anticipate aspects of the tragedy, or at least understand the warning signs she witnessed in the hours before her parents' deaths. The fact that she later identified Nick as a dangerous family member speaks to the letter's prescience, highlighting a link between parental foresight and real-world outcomes that is both extraordinary and tragic. Legal analysts also note that the letter could play a role in court proceedings. While it may not prove direct involvement in the murders, it could provide context for understanding relationships, perceived threats, and the psychological environment within the Reiner household. For prosecutors, fragments of the letter offer insight into potential motives and pre-existing tensions. For defense attorneys, the same document could be used to frame interpretations of Nick's behavior, the family's history, or even Romy's perceptions. In this sense, the letter exists as both evidence and psychological roadmap, bridging the private and public dimensions of the case. The secrets within the letter extend beyond warnings. Some sources indicate that it referenced financial disputes, subtle rivalries between siblings, and patterns of favoritism that may have fueled resentment. While these details may seem minor in isolation, they take on a far more sinister significance when viewed in the context of the murders. Human behavior, especially in families, is often a complex mix of love, envy, and obligation. The letter appears to capture this complexity with remarkable clarity. Furthermore, the timing of the letter's emergence raises profound questions. Had it been discovered earlier, could tragedy have been averted? Or was it always destined to become a posthumous guide to understanding events that could not have been prevented? These questions linger, emphasizing the tragic irony that even foresight, care, and warning are sometimes powerless against the unpredictable forces of human behavior. For Romy, reading the letter in the context of her parents' deaths was both clarifying and haunting. It provided a framework for understanding behaviors she had previously struggled to interpret. It offered validation for instincts she may have had about danger within the family. And yet, it also reinforced the painful reality that warnings, no matter how prescient, cannot always prevent tragedy. The letter was simultaneously protective and a reminder of loss, a tangible artifact of a father's love intersecting with the harshest possible reality. Media coverage of the letter has been cautious but relentless. Headlines have hinted at its revelations, teasing details about its warnings, its references to family tension, and its potential connection to Nick's arrest. Social media speculation has turned fragments into narratives, often conflating fact with conjecture, but the underlying fascination is clear. A letter written with care and foresight became central to understanding a tragedy that shocked Hollywood and the world. Experts in human behavior suggest that the letter's value lies not just in what it contained, but in what it represented. An acknowledgement that danger can exist within familiar spaces, that even loved ones can pose threats, and that communication, written, direct, or otherwise, can serve as both shield and revelation. In the case of the Reiners, Rob's letter exemplifies this dual role, offering both insight and warning, both emotional guidance and practical strategy, all in one document. And yet, despite the depth of its warnings, the letter could not prevent what happened. It could not stop the violence. It could not alter the trajectory of events that led to the brutal deaths of Rob and Michelle. But it did provide context, a lens through which to understand the tragedy, and a narrative thread connecting parental intuition to the real-world consequences of family dysfunction. As investigators, journalists, and family members continue to piece together the events of that night, the letter remains central. A reminder that some truths are hidden in plain sight, waiting for the moment when they become tragically relevant. And as the story moves forward, the secrets within the letter will intersect with legal proceedings, family dynamics, and public fascination, revealing connections that no one outside the Reiner household could have anticipated. Families are complex entities, often defined by love, loyalty, and shared history. Yet beneath the surface, undercurrents of tension, rivalry, and resentment can quietly shape behaviors and relationships. The Reiner family, celebrated for its Hollywood accomplishments and outwardly harmonious image, was no exception. What had been hidden behind the veneer of success and charm began to emerge in the aftermath of Rob and Michelle Reiner's brutal deaths, revealing fractures that few outside the family could have imagined. The first signs of these tensions were subtle, often overlooked by outsiders. Sibling rivalry, disagreements over attention or approval, and differences in temperament had long existed within the Reiner household. Tracy, Romy, and Nick had grown up navigating these dynamics, learning to negotiate their roles within a family structure dominated by Rob's intense presence and Michelle's stabilizing influence. On the surface, the family seemed functional, even enviable. But as the investigation unfolded, it became clear that appearances had been misleading. Sources close to the family suggest that Nick, in particular, had long struggled with feelings of inadequacy and frustration. While outwardly charming and charismatic, he reportedly had difficulties managing conflict and expressing anger constructively. Some insiders hinted at occasional outbursts, patterns of impulsivity, and strained interactions with both parents and siblings. These behaviors, once dismissed as quirks or youthful impulsiveness, were now viewed through a darker lens, raising questions about whether they were early warning signs of what would later occur. Tracy's position in the family was equally complex. As the middle child, she often found herself mediating disputes and maintaining harmony. Her role required careful observation, emotional intelligence, and restraint. Yet, even with these skills, the accumulated tensions between siblings, coupled with the pressures of fame and public scrutiny, created a volatile environment. Romy, the youngest, had a more observational role, internalizing family dynamics while trying to make sense of relationships she did not fully control. Financial pressures, though perhaps invisible to the public eye, also contributed to the underlying tensions. The Reiner estate, valued at $13.5 million, was a symbol of achievement but also a source of potential conflict. Questions about inheritance, responsibility, and entitlement may have simmered beneath the surface, feeding resentment or fostering feelings of competition. In many families, financial dynamics amplify emotional tensions, and the Reiners were no exception. Adding to these pressures was the intense scrutiny that comes with Hollywood fame. Friends, colleagues, and industry peers often blur the line between personal and professional life, creating expectations and obligations that extend beyond the household. The Reiner social circles, once a source of connection and support, may also have introduced subtle stressors, comparisons, judgment, and the pressure to maintain a polished public image while managing private conflicts. Investigators noted that family tensions often manifest in seemingly minor ways before escalating. Small disagreements, ignored grievances, and unresolved conflicts can fester, creating a sense of imbalance. In the Reiner household, these tensions were reportedly compounded by differences in personality and perception. Nick's impulsivity contrasted sharply with Tracy's measured approach and Romy's observant nature. Misunderstandings and perceived slights could easily spiral into significant disputes, particularly when combined with emotional baggage from childhood and adolescence. The lost letter, as previously discussed, hinted at these underlying dynamics. Rob's words acknowledged patterns of behavior, potential triggers, and signs of instability. He wrote not only as a father offering guidance, but as someone acutely aware of the latent risks within his family. The letter suggested that even small, seemingly inconsequential behaviors could escalate into serious consequences if ignored, a prescient insight that would become tragically relevant. Public fascination with family tensions often focuses on scandal or sensationalism, but the Reiner case illustrates a more profound reality. The complexity of human relationships can sometimes become dangerous, especially when combined with unresolved conflict, impulsivity, and lack of intervention. The intersection of these factors creates an environment where tragedy can unfold in ways that feel both inevitable and shocking. Psychologists studying the case emphasize that the combination of personality differences, sibling rivalry, and parental influence can create a volatile mix. In families with high achievement or public